My name is Vanessa Torres, and I used to think loyalty meant something in the corporate world. I was 29, a senior operations coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company, and I genuinely loved what I did. I coordinated shipments across 3 regions, managed vendor relationships, and kept our systems running smoothly. I wasn't just good at my job, I was exceptional at it. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my boss called me into his office. His name was Bradley Cooper, yes, really, and he had the ego to match the Hollywood name. He slid a printed memo across his desk and leaned back in his leather chair with his arms crossed. Effective immediately, we're adjusting your compensation to reflect current market conditions, he said casually, like he was discussing the weather. I stared at the paper. My salary had been cut by 15%. This is temporary, right? I asked, my voice barely steady. He smiled. Not kindly. Be grateful you're still here, Vanessa. A lot of companies are downsizing completely. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd been slapped across the face in front of everyone I knew. Let me paint you a clear picture of what my actual job looked like. Every morning, I arrived at 7:30, an hour before most people, to review overnight shipping updates from our international partners. I managed relationships with 47 different vendors across 5 countries. When shipments were delayed, I was the one who smoothed things over with angry clients. I created the tracking system everyone used but nobody credited me for. I trained every new hire in our department for the past 2 years. When Bradley needed reports for executive meetings, I was the one who compiled data, created presentations, and made him look competent in front of senior leadership. I handled customs documentation, compliance audits, and emergency reroutes when weather or strikes disrupted supply chains. My phone never stopped buzzing. My inbox never emptied. I ate lunch at my desk 4 days out of 5. And somehow I was replaceable enough to deserve a pay cut with 0 warning and 0 explanation. That Friday, I checked my bank account during my morning coffee. My direct deposit was lighter than expected. Way lighter. I pulled up my pay stub on the company portal, my hands shaking slightly as I scrolled through the numbers. There it was. The reduction. Already implemented. No grace period. No transition. Just 15% gone, like it never existed. I calculated quickly in my head. That was nearly $800 a month. Almost $10,000 a year. Money I'd been counting on for my car payment, my student loans, my rent in a city that got more expensive every quarter. I sat there in the break room, staring at my phone screen, feeling my chest tighten. Around me, colleagues laughed about their weekend plans. Someone microwaved fish. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Nobody knew. Nobody asked if I was okay. I closed the banking app and took a long breath. This was real. This was happening. And I needed to figure out what to do next. I scheduled a meeting with Bradley for Monday morning. Professional. Calm. I'd prepared talking points, printed documentation of my contributions, and practiced keeping my emotions in check. I wanted to discuss the compensation adjustment, I said, sliding my folder across his desk. I believe there may have been a miscommunication about my role's scope and impact. He didn't even open the folder. It's not personal, Vanessa. It's business. We all have to make sacrifices. Are other coordinators receiving similar reductions? His jaw tightened. Personnel matters are confidential. But I'll say this, you should view this as a learning experience. Sometimes we get comfortable and forget that employment is a privilege, not a right. A privilege. He actually said that. I've exceeded every performance metric for 3 consecutive quarters, I said quietly. And we appreciate that. We really do. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. But if you're not happy with the arrangement, we can certainly explore other options. The threat was crystal clear. Shut up or get out. I left his office with my folder unopened and my dignity barely intact. Over the next week, I started paying attention to things I'd been too busy to notice before. Like how Marcus, who'd been hired 6 months after me with less experience, got approved for a company car. How Trent received a promotion to senior coordinator, a title I'd been promised but never received, with a salary bump that likely exceeded what I'd lost. During a department meeting, Bradley praised Trent's initiative on a project I'd actually conceived and outlined. Trent had simply presented it. I watched Bradley clap him on the shoulder like a proud father while I sat 3 chairs away, invisible. When I mentioned to a colleague that I'd had my pay reduced, she looked genuinely shocked. Wait, really? I thought the budget cuts were only affecting the warehouse staff. They weren't cutting everyone. They were cutting me. Specifically. Deliberately. I started noticing how Bradley spoke differently to me than to others. Shorter sentences. Dismissive gestures. He questioned my decisions more, interrupted me in meetings, and CC'd himself on emails I sent to vendors, something he'd never done before. It felt like he was building a case. A narrative. Preparing to justify something worse than a pay cut. I did what you're supposed to do. I went to Human Resources. I scheduled a confidential meeting with Amanda Pierce, the HR generalist who'd processed my original hiring paperwork 3 years ago. I brought documentation, printed emails, and a timeline of events. Amanda listened with a sympathetic expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. She took notes on a legal pad, nodding at appropriate intervals. I understand this feels unfair, she said when I finished. Let me look into the circumstances and get back to you. A week passed. Nothing. I sent a follow-up email. She responded with, still gathering information. These things take time. 2 more weeks. I requested another meeting. This time her tone was different, more formal, less warm. After reviewing your file and speaking with management, the compensation adjustment appears to be within company policy. Budget reallocations happen across all departments. There's no evidence of discriminatory practice. Did you speak with other coordinators about their compensation? I can't discuss other employees with you. She closed her folder. Is there anything else? I understood then. HR wasn't there to protect me. They were there to protect the company from me. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the pay cut. We were in a team meeting discussing Q4 logistics planning. I'd prepared a detailed presentation about optimizing our shipping routes to save costs, real, significant savings that would impact the bottom line. Halfway through my explanation, Bradley interrupted. This seems overly complicated. Are you sure you understand the vendor contracts well enough to make these recommendations? The room went quiet. I'd been managing those exact vendor contracts for 2 years. Everyone knew it. I've reviewed every active contract, I said evenly. The cost analysis is based on current terms and maybe run this by Trent before we move forward. Get a second opinion from someone with a fresh perspective. Someone with a fresh perspective. Translation. Someone male. Someone he trusted. Someone who wasn't me. I smiled. Nodded. Said nothing else for the rest of the meeting. But something fundamental shifted inside me in that moment. I stopped feeling hurt. Stopped feeling angry. Instead, I felt something colder and infinitely more useful. Clarity. He'd underestimated me. And that was going to be his biggest mistake. I became very, very quiet after that meeting. I stopped volunteering ideas. Stopped staying late. Stopped going above and beyond. I showed up, did exactly what was required, and left precisely at 5. But while I was quiet, I was also watching. Really watching. I noticed how Bradley took credit for resolutions I'd negotiated with difficult vendors. How he forwarded my reports to executives with his name in the subject line. How he'd built his entire reputation on work his team, my work, produced. I started paying attention to processes only I fully understood. The shipping software I'd customized. The spreadsheet macros I'd created. The relationships I'd personally cultivated with key contacts at our largest accounts. I noticed which systems had documentation and which ones existed primarily in my head. Which clients asked for me specifically. Which problems only got solved when I intervened. I realized something powerful. I wasn't just good at my job. I was the load-bearing wall of our entire operation. Remove me, and things wouldn't just slow down. They'd collapse. Here's what Bradley didn't know. When I'd created our tracking system 18 months ago, I'd built it in a third-party platform I'd researched and proposed. The company approved it, but the account was under my email. I was the primary administrator. I'd trained everyone on how to use it, but I'd never documented the back-end processes or shared the master passwords with anyone else. Our 3 largest clients, representing 40% of department revenue, had relationships with me personally. We'd solved crises together, grabbed coffee at trade shows, exchanged family photos. They knew my name. Bradley was just the guy who showed up to sign contracts I'd negotiated. I'd also been handling a major compliance audit for the past 6 months. I knew which documentation was where, which processes were borderline, and which shortcuts Bradley had authorized against my advice. Everything was scattered across drives, emails, and handwritten notes. And I'd been the only one communicating with our international shipping partners in their time zones. Those relationships were built on trust that took years to develop. I didn't control everything, but I controlled enough. More than anyone realized. More than Bradley could handle alone. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Not in anger. Not in haste. With the cold precision of someone who'd finally stopped expecting fairness and started expecting results. I updated my resume, highlighting accomplishments I'd been too modest to emphasize before. I reached out to former colleagues who'd moved to other companies. I activated my LinkedIn profile and started responding to recruiter messages I'd previously ignored. But I didn't rage quit. That would have been satisfying for about 10 minutes and stupid for the rest of my career. Instead, I planned an exit that would be unimpeachable, professional, clean, impossible to weaponize against me. I began documenting everything in a secure personal folder. Not to sabotage, just to protect myself and ensure proper transition. Except I was very, very selective about what I documented and what I kept in my head. I started subtly extracting myself from being the single point of failure, but slowly enough that nobody noticed yet. I wanted my departure to be felt, but I wanted it to be felt after I was safely gone. This wasn't about revenge. This was about consequences. I created a folder labeled Transition Documentation on my personal laptop. Every conversation with Bradley went in there. Every email where he contradicted himself, took credit, or made unreasonable demands. Every instance where I'd flagged a problem and been ignored. I kept a log of hours worked, all those early mornings and late nights that never showed up on my timesheet because I was salaried. I documented the projects I'd led that others had been credited for. I saved performance reviews where I'd exceeded expectations. I requested copies of my personnel file from HR, my right under company policy. I downloaded my own emails from the server, completely legally, for personal records. I backed up templates and processes I'd personally created. None of this was vindictive. It was smart. If Bradley decided to challenge my unemployment, dispute a reference, or rewrite history after I left, I'd have receipts. Printed, dated, undeniable receipts. I wasn't building a weapon. I was building insurance. And with every document I saved, every email I preserved, I felt more in control than I had in months. He'd taken my money and my dignity, but he couldn't take my records. The response came faster than I expected. 2 recruiters connected me with companies looking for operations specialists with international logistics experience. One of them was Horizon Supply Group, a competitor we'd actually pitched against several times. Their operations director, a sharp woman named Patricia Wu, interviewed me personally. We talked for 90 minutes. She asked detailed questions that proved she'd actually read my resume. She wanted to know my problem-solving process, how I handled difficult clients, what systems I'd implemented. At the end, she said something that nearly made me cry. "You're exactly the kind of professional we've been looking for. Someone who doesn't just manage operations, someone who thinks strategically about them." The offer came 3 days later. Same title, but senior level. 20% more than my original salary. Better benefits. Hybrid schedule. Respect built into the job description. I read that offer letter 3 times, alone in my apartment, feeling something I hadn't felt in months, valued. I didn't accept immediately. I sat with it for 2 days, making sure it was real, making sure it was right. Then I signed. I didn't announce my job search. Didn't change my behavior. But something shifted in how I carried myself. I stopped flinching when Bradley spoke to me. Stopped over-explaining my decisions. When he questioned my work, I responded with brief, confident answers and moved on. In a vendor call where he tried to undercut my negotiation, I simply restated my position with calm authority. The vendor sided with me. Bradley's face tightened, but he said nothing. I caught him watching me sometimes during meetings, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Suspicion, maybe. Or confusion. Like he sensed something had changed but couldn't identify what. Marcus asked me one afternoon if I was okay. You seem different. More. I don't know. Zen. I smiled. Just focused. What I didn't say, I was different. I wasn't the person begging for fairness anymore. I wasn't the employee hoping loyalty would be rewarded. I was a professional with options, executing a plan. And that changed everything. I submitted my resignation on a Wednesday morning. 2 weeks' notice as required by my contract. The letter was 3 paragraphs, polite and utterly professional. I thanked the company for the opportunity, expressed appreciation for my colleagues, and offered to assist with transition planning. I didn't mention the pay cut. Didn't mention Bradley. Didn't express grievances. Just a clean, respectful resignation that couldn't be twisted into anything dramatic. I handed it to Bradley in person with a copy to HR. He read it twice, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like panic, quickly masked. This seems sudden, he said. I've accepted a position that's better aligned with my career goals. We could discuss options here. Maybe revisit your compensation. Now he wanted to discuss it. Now it was negotiable. I appreciate that, but my decision is final. I'm committed to ensuring a smooth transition over the next 2 weeks. His jaw worked. Fine. We'll need comprehensive documentation of all your projects and vendor relationships. Of course, I said. Whatever's reasonable within the transition period. I left his office with my head high, feeling lighter than I had in months. The panic started quietly, behind closed doors, but word travels fast in a small department. Bradley called an emergency meeting with the operations team that afternoon. I wasn't invited, but Marcus told me about it later. He asked who knew how to access the shipment tracking system, Marcus said. Like, the back end. Nobody had any idea what he was talking about. Then he started asking about vendor contacts and compliance files. Vanessa, do you have all that information documented somewhere? Some of it, I said truthfully. I'll do my best to compile what I can in 2 weeks. Bradley scheduled daily meetings with me for the remainder of my notice period. In the first one, he had a list. A long list. I need the password for the tracking platform. All vendor contact information. The compliance audit files. Documentation for the shipping software customizations. Client communication history. Process manuals. I nodded and took notes. I'll work on gathering what's available. Over the next few days, I provided basic information. Vendor names and general contacts, the kind of thing anyone could find with a Google search. Surface-level process documents that explained what we did but not how I'd actually done it. Passwords to shared accounts, but not to the systems I'd personally set up. I was cooperative. Professional. But not entirely helpful. My last day was a Friday. The following Monday, my phone started buzzing. Texts from former colleagues. Confused. Concerned. Panicking. The tracking system is locked. No one can access it. A shipment got stuck at customs and nobody knows who to call. Client from the Peterson account is asking for you specifically. Bradley tried to handle it and it went badly. By Wednesday, I heard through the grapevine that they'd missed a critical deadline for a major shipment because the documentation I usually handled wasn't properly filed. The client threatened to pull their contract. The compliance audit deadline was approaching, and nobody could locate half the required files. Bradley had to request an extension, which made the company look disorganized. The tracking platform I'd set up? Turned out when I left, my admin access was automatically revoked per the platform's security protocols. Nobody else had administrator rights. They were locked out of their own system. I didn't cause these problems intentionally. I'd simply been the only person holding everything together, and nobody had bothered to notice until the scaffolding was gone. I didn't gloat. But I didn't lose sleep over it either. 2 weeks into my new job, I got an email from Amanda in HR, subject line, follow-up conversation. Suddenly, after months of stonewalling, she wanted to talk. She asked if I'd be available for a call to discuss my departure and gather feedback for improvement purposes. I agreed, curious. On the call, her tone was careful. Apologetic, even. We're conducting a review of department operations and management practices. Your insights would be valuable. Can you speak to any challenges you experienced during your time with the operations team? Translation: everything was falling apart and they needed to know what they'd lost. I was honest but measured. I explained the pay cut without emotion. Described how concerns were dismissed. Mentioned the lack of documentation because I'd been too busy handling crises to create it. I didn't attack Bradley directly. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. Why didn't you come to us sooner? Amanda asked. I did, I said simply. You told me the situation was within policy. Silence. I see. Thank you for your time, Vanessa. 3 days later, I learned through Marcus that HR had launched a formal investigation. The investigation moved faster than I expected. HR interviewed current team members, reviewed email records, examined the compensation adjustments across the department, and discovered that mine had been the only one. They pulled Bradley's expense reports and found inconsistencies. They talked to clients, several of whom expressed confusion about why their primary contact was no longer with the company. They discovered that Bradley had been taking credit for vendor negotiations I'd handled, even forwarding my emails to executives with his name attached. They found instances where he'd overridden compliance recommendations I'd made, creating exposure the company was now scrambling to address. Someone, I never learned who, mentioned the comment he'd made in the meeting, questioning whether I understood vendor contracts. That led to a review of my qualifications versus his statements about my performance. The compliance officer got involved when they couldn't locate audit documentation. Finance got involved when they calculated how much the lost client contract would cost. Senior leadership got involved when they realized how much institutional knowledge had walked out the door. My documentation helped, but I wasn't the only source. Turns out, when you're a bad manager, people remember. Colleagues I worked with had their own stories. Patterns emerged. I didn't participate beyond that one HR call. I'd moved on. But consequences have momentum. Marcus called me 3 weeks after I'd left. You're not going to believe this. I waited. They suspended Bradley. Pending review. There's talk about financial misconduct. Something about how he justified your pay cut to finance. Apparently, he told them your performance was substandard, but your reviews say the opposite. They think he pocketed the budget difference. My stomach dropped. I hadn't known that part. I'd assumed it was just cruelty or incompetence. But fraud? That was darker than I'd imagined. And remember those compliance shortcuts you warned him about? Marcus continued. One of them triggered a penalty. Big one. 6 figures. Leadership is furious. Over the next week, more details emerged. Other employees came forward with concerns they'd been too afraid to voice while Bradley had power. A pattern of favoritism, intimidation, and credit stealing that went beyond just me. The vendor I'd worked closest with apparently sent an email to senior leadership asking why their exceptional account manager had left and expressing concern about service quality under new management. Everything unraveled. Not because I'd sabotaged him, I hadn't. But because removing the person holding everything together exposed all the cracks underneath. I wasn't present for Bradley's final meeting, but details filtered back through people who'd seen the aftermath. He was called into a conference room with HR, the department VP, and someone from legal. The meeting lasted 17 minutes. He emerged with a cardboard box and an escort to collect his personal items. No farewell email. No transition period. Just a quiet, immediate exit. His official departure was announced as pursuing other opportunities, but everyone in the department knew what that meant. You don't get walked out by security when you're pursuing opportunities. The VP of Operations sent a department-wide email acknowledging leadership changes and committing to rebuilding trust and operational excellence. They hired an external consultant to assess processes and team dynamics. They promoted Trent to interim manager, which felt ironic, considering, but also brought in a director-level person from another division to provide oversight. From what I heard, one of the first things the new director said was, "Why wasn't there any documentation?" And who was Vanessa Torres? The power hadn't just reversed. It had evaporated. Bradley went from untouchable to unemployable at that company in less than a month. I learned about his termination through LinkedIn, of all places. His profile changed from operations manager to consultant with vague dates. Then, a few weeks later, to simply listing his previous role as ended. Marcus confirmed it officially, he's done. Not just fired. They're apparently reviewing whether to pursue legal action over the budget stuff. His reputation in the industry is toast. I felt something unexpected when I heard that. Not satisfaction exactly. Not quite justice either. More like completion. The kind of feeling you get when a storm finally passes and you can assess the damage in daylight. I didn't celebrate. Didn't post cryptic messages on social media. Didn't call former colleagues to gossip. That would have made it about me, and it wasn't. It was about natural consequences reaching someone who'd thought himself immune to them. He'd built his success on underestimating people, taking shortcuts, and assuming nobody would notice or care. Eventually, people noticed. People cared. I'd just been the catalyst. The moment when the carefully stacked house of cards finally had one piece removed. About 6 weeks after I'd left, I got an unexpected email. From Trent. Subject line, I owe you an apology. I almost deleted it. But curiosity won. The email was longer than I expected. He admitted he'd known the promotion he received should have been mine. He'd stayed quiet during meetings when Bradley dismissed my ideas. He'd accepted credit he didn't deserve because it benefited his career. I told myself it wasn't my problem, he wrote. That you were capable enough to advocate for yourself. But I watched someone treat you unfairly and said nothing. That makes me complicit. I'm sorry. We should have listened. I read it twice. Then I wrote back, keeping it brief. I appreciate you saying that. It matters. Did it fix anything? No. Did it change the past? No. But it acknowledged a truth. Silence enables harm. And maybe, just maybe, he'd remember that the next time he saw something wrong. A week later, Amanda from HR also reached out. Not officially, a personal note. I should have pushed harder on your concerns. I let policy become an excuse for inaction. I'm sorry. These apologies didn't erase what happened. But they confirmed I hadn't been crazy. Hadn't been oversensitive. Hadn't deserved what Bradley did. Sometimes that's enough. My first day at Horizon Supply Group felt surreal. I had an actual onboarding process. A mentor assigned to help me learn their systems. A team that introduced themselves and seemed genuinely interested in working with me. Patricia gave me a tour and said, your desk. Your space. Your system login is ready. Let us know what tools you need. In my first week, I made a suggestion in a meeting about streamlining a communication process. Instead of dismissal, I got, that's smart. Can you draft a proposal? Someone asked my opinion and actually waited for my complete answer. When I completed a project ahead of schedule, my supervisor acknowledged it publicly and asked if I wanted to lead the next phase. The work was challenging, maybe more complex than my old job, but I had resources. Support. Respect. The baseline professional courtesy that everyone deserves but not everyone receives. I realized how much energy I'd been spending just surviving. Now I could actually focus on excelling. One afternoon, a colleague asked where I'd worked before. I gave the company name, and she nodded. I've heard that place has high turnover in operations. Management issues. Something like that, I said. And left it there. 6 months into my new job, I got promoted to senior operations manager. Not because I'd begged or politicked or sacrificed myself until I collapsed. Because I'd done excellent work and someone noticed. I used what I'd learned. I documented everything. I trained my team thoroughly. I built systems with redundancy so that no single person became an irreplaceable bottleneck. I gave credit where it was due. When someone did exceptional work, I made sure leadership knew their name. I also learned to set boundaries. To leave at 5 when the work was done. To say no to unreasonable demands. To recognize my worth and insist others recognize it too. What did I take from that experience? Knowledge that I was capable of more than I'd realized. Proof that staying somewhere out of loyalty or fear is sometimes the worst decision you can make. Understanding that professional revenge isn't about destruction. It's about accountability and letting consequences happen naturally. What did I leave behind? The belief that working harder would make people treat you better. The fear of standing up for myself. the shame I'd felt that day in Bradley's office. I left behind the version of myself who thought she deserved that treatment. People ask me sometimes if I regret how things went down, if I wish I'd handled it differently, fought harder, stayed longer, left sooner. Honestly, no. Every step happened exactly as it needed to. Bradley made choices to undervalue me, to cut my pay, to take credit, to dismiss concerns. I made choices too, to document, to plan, to leave professionally, to build something better. He faced consequences not because I destroyed him, but because I stopped protecting him from his own incompetence. Here's what I learned. The best revenge isn't dramatic or loud. It's not public callouts or burned bridges. It's competence, patience, and being professional even when others aren't. It's building your case quietly, protecting yourself legally, and walking away with your dignity intact. It's letting someone's own actions speak louder than your anger ever could. It's moving on to somewhere that values you while the place that didn't suffers the consequences of losing you. Bradley lost his job. I gained clarity, confidence, and a career that actually respects me. That math speaks for itself. So to anyone reading this while sitting at a desk where you're undervalued, underpaid, and told to be grateful, document everything, build your exit strategy, and leave professionally. Your revenge isn't destruction. It's your success. It's thriving somewhere better while the people who underestimated you realize what they lost. And trust me, that's the sweetest victory of all.